What would you do if your entire life, every secret you thought was buried, suddenly came crashing into the daylight? Imagine opening a door you've never dared to touch, discovering evidence that could destroy not just your reputation, but your family, your safety, even your sense of self. That was the moment allegedly faced by Tracy Reiner, a moment that, according to reports, forced her to make a decision that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. Within hours, she was gone. Scotland bound, leaving behind questions, rumors, and a family forever fractured. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began with a vault. Not just any vault, but one that held the legacy, the wealth, and allegedly the secrets of a prominent Hollywood family. Inside, investigators reportedly found a blackmail file, carefully labeled, Tracy, 2015 yacht incident. A folder like any other, except that what it contained was anything but ordinary. Photos, financial documents, threats, all pointing to a scandal that, until this point, had been carefully locked away. Secrets that, once leaked, could ruin everything. And apparently, they had been leaked. Now, you might be asking yourself, how does someone react when they realize their private life is no longer private? Most of us would panic. But what if the panic was immediate, instinctual, unavoidable? That's reportedly what happened. Within hours of learning that the file was in prosecutors' hands, Tracy allegedly booked a flight to Scotland, a country chosen not for comfort or leisure, but for distance, obscurity, and, perhaps, safety. The decision was drastic. It was sudden, and it was calculated. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to step back and look at the context. Just days before, tragedy had struck the Reiner family in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Rob Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, were found dead, victims of multiple sharp force injuries. Homicide was immediately confirmed. The discovery reportedly came at the hands of their daughter Romy, 27, who allegedly alerted authorities to a dangerous family member who should be considered a suspect. The details were horrific, unsettling, almost surreal. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, another name began to surface, one that would ignite speculation, fear, and intrigue: Tracy Reiner. The story wasn't just about murder. It was about secrets buried for years, about leverage and betrayal, about what happens when private scandals intersect with public tragedies. The alleged blackmail file represented more than just potential leverage. It symbolized power, control, and, ultimately, fear. What could Rob Reiner have possibly planned with this file? Was it intended as a weapon, a shield, or simply a record of misdeeds he never intended to use? The file's existence, and the fact that it had allegedly come to light, changed everything. And for Tracy, it may have been the catalyst for her sudden disappearance. Let's consider the human element for a moment. Fear can make people do things they never imagined. Flight is often the first instinct, and when the stakes are high, reputation, freedom, safety, there's little room for hesitation. Imagine the weight of knowing that a file containing your secrets, carefully preserved for years, is now in the hands of people who could make those secrets public. How would you process that? Would you confront it head-on? Or would you flee, choosing the uncertainty of escape over the certainty of exposure? Reports suggest that Tracy chose the latter. Allegedly, she left behind the familiar, the comfortable, the world she had always known, and stepped into the unknown. Scotland became the refuge, the shield against a reality that had suddenly become unbearable. But even as she flew, questions followed her. Who had leaked the file? Was it intentional, accidental, or part of a larger strategy? And what did this mean for the family she left behind? Already mourning, already fractured, and now facing new layers of suspicion and confusion. The timing of her alleged departure was also telling. While authorities were still piecing together the events at the Brentwood estate, she was reportedly boarding a plane, leaving the country while headlines and speculation swirled. It's almost cinematic, the stark contrast between a grieving family in Los Angeles and a solitary figure crossing the Atlantic, escaping, calculating, fearing. And yet, the story is far from complete. Every answer seems to raise another question. Every reported fact, another possibility. And that's precisely what makes this story so compelling. The more you think you know, the less certain you become. But let's not forget the broader context. In a family as public and prominent as the Reiners, private disputes and hidden tensions are often magnified. Wealth, influence, and legacy can both protect and endanger. The discovery of the blackmail file, allegedly linking Tracy to events from nearly a decade ago, was a spark in an already volatile environment. It brought buried conflicts to the surface and forced a reckoning with consequences that could no longer be contained. Suddenly, family dynamics, legal implications, and public perception collided in ways that were unavoidable, explosive, and tragic. And yet, the most compelling aspect of this story isn't just the alleged file or the flight to Scotland. It's the psychology behind it. What does it take to make someone run? How do fear, shame, loyalty, and survival instincts intersect in a situation that seems both unreal and inevitable? Every choice has ramifications. Every action sends ripples. And in this case, the alleged decisions of one individual appear to have amplified the consequences for the entire family, leaving a trail of questions, accusations, and speculation that may never be fully answered. So, as we begin to unpack this story, consider this. The alleged events are a study in human behavior under extreme pressure. They force us to ask difficult questions. What is justice when secrets have power? What is loyalty when fear dominates? And ultimately, what do we do when the past we thought was gone comes roaring back into the present, threatening to consume everything in its path? By now, you might be wondering what exactly was in the file. What could be so damaging that it allegedly drove someone to flee halfway across the world? The answers are elusive, the details murky, and the speculation intense. Investigators, prosecutors, and family members each have their version of events. But for the rest of us, there is only the unfolding narrative, the tension of unanswered questions, and the dramatic reality that actions, once taken, can never be fully reversed. And here lies the central tension. Tracy's alleged flight to Scotland didn't end the story. It was only the beginning. Because once the file was exposed, once the secrets were out, the ripple effect could no longer be contained. What came next would change the way the family was seen, the way the public understood the tragedy, and the way the narrative would unfold for years to come. And just when it seems that the pieces are falling into place, just when you think you can map the trajectory of events, another layer emerges. What role did other family members play? Were there additional files? Additional threats? And most importantly, could anyone truly escape the consequences of buried secrets now brought into the light? The tension is palpable, the stakes enormous, and the answers, if they exist, are still waiting to be revealed. So, as we delve into the details of the alleged events surrounding the Reiner family, remember this. Every secret has a cost, every action a consequence, and every revelation a power that can't be ignored. Tracy's alleged decision to leave the country may have been an act of survival. But survival, in a story this complex and fraught with tragedy, rarely comes without consequences. And the story we are about to explore is one where fear, secrecy, and sudden decisions collide with life-altering force, creating a narrative that is as compelling as it is chilling. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Some nights start like any other. The air is calm, the streets quiet, and the world moves along its familiar rhythm. But for the Reiner family, one particular night in December did not follow any rhythm anyone could have anticipated. It was the night that would shatter not only a family, but also the carefully curated perception of normalcy surrounding them. A night where the extraordinary collided with the tragic, and where secrets, long kept in the shadows, began to claw their way into the harsh light. Imagine being the first to step into a scene so catastrophic it takes your breath away. That was allegedly Romy Reiner's experience. According to reports, she arrived at her family's Brentwood estate, $13.5 million of polished marble, manicured gardens, and a sprawling guest house, to discover a scene that no one could ever truly prepare for. Inside the main house, her parents, Rob and Michelle, were found unresponsive. The cause of death, later confirmed as multiple sharp force injuries, left no ambiguity. This was not an accident. This was homicide. Pause for a moment and consider the psychological weight of that discovery. A daughter, barely past her 20s, faced with the bodies of her parents. The shock, the disbelief, the gut-wrenching horror. And yet, amid the panic and chaos, reports claim that she immediately did something most people might not have the presence of mind to do. She alerted authorities, but not just in the usual way. She allegedly warned them of a dangerous family member, someone who, in her eyes, should be considered a suspect. The implication was chilling. The threat was not external. It came from within. This revelation changes everything. It shifts the lens from a simple tragic incident to a story of suspicion, family fracture, and potential betrayal. Imagine the investigators walking into that house. The grandeur of wealth and celebrity surrounds them, but the air is thick with tension, uncertainty, and fear. Every object could hold a clue. Every family member could be hiding something. Every step they take could uncover more than they bargained for. And amid this uncertainty, one question begins to gnaw at the edges of everyone's mind. Who could have done this, and why? But before we can even begin to answer that, we must understand the atmosphere of the Reiner estate. Wealth often creates an illusion of invulnerability. Luxurious estates, expensive security systems, and layers of staff can make even the most precarious situations seem stable, controlled, and safe. Yet, paradoxically, the very wealth that creates this illusion can also amplify danger. Money can protect, but it can also attract envy, resentment, and, in some cases, violence. In the case of the Reiners, it seems that wealth was no shield against tragedy. The first responders reportedly described the scene as one of surreal horror. The polished floors reflected the chaos in an almost cinematic way. Investigators had to step carefully, both physically and emotionally, as they began their methodical work. Every object, every footprint, every trace of activity became a critical piece of the puzzle. And amid the forensic analysis, another layer emerged: the presence of a guest house, where the Reiner's adult son, Nick, allegedly lived. This seemingly innocent detail would later become a central point of focus. Reports indicate that Nick Reiner, 32 at the time, was taken into custody that very night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The rapidity of the arrest left the public stunned, and the media scrambled for every possible detail. Yet, as is often the case in tragedies of this magnitude, immediate appearances can be deceiving. Arrests do not always equate to guilt, and early narratives, fueled by shock and speculation, can distort the truth. And this is where the story becomes even more intricate. Because while one part of the family was immediately under scrutiny, another part was moving in ways that would remain hidden for weeks. Tracy Reiner, allegedly named in a blackmail file found in Rob's vault, reportedly learned of the file's exposure around the same time. And while the family and authorities were grappling with a violent loss, she was allegedly planning her escape. It is a juxtaposition that is almost impossible to comprehend. Death in one corner of the estate, fear and flight in another. And yet, according to reports, it happened almost simultaneously, creating a tension that was electric, palpable, and full of unanswered questions. The question naturally arises: how does someone react when they realize the secrets they thought were private are suddenly exposed in a legal, investigative setting? Fear is an instinctual response. Panic can override reason. And when the stakes involve not just personal reputation but the very safety of oneself, decisions become immediate, decisive, and, sometimes, irreversible. Tracy's alleged flight to Scotland represents that kind of decision. A choice made under pressure, with the clock ticking and options narrowing with every passing minute. Meanwhile, authorities were reportedly combing through the estate, documenting every detail, cataloging every object, and piecing together the timeline of events that led to the tragic deaths. The challenge was monumental. They had to differentiate between routine household activity, harmless interactions, and the traces of a violent confrontation. They had to do this while navigating the emotional weight of dealing with a grieving family, a media frenzy, and, allegedly, the looming presence of secrets that threatened to erupt at any moment. And yet, even amid this chaos, investigators reportedly stumbled upon something entirely unexpected: the vault. Not merely a place for cash, jewelry, or collectibles, but a repository for sensitive documents, private records, and, allegedly, evidence of past indiscretions. It was inside this vault that the blackmail file allegedly linking Tracy to the 2015 yacht incident was discovered. And the discovery of that file changed the trajectory of the investigation. Suddenly, the story was no longer only about a violent crime. It was about secrets, leverage, and the fear that can drive people to unimaginable actions. Here is where the emotional intensity peaks. Think of a domino effect, each piece falling with precision, unstoppable once set in motion. First, the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner. Then, the suspicion cast upon their son, Nick. Next, the alleged discovery of the blackmail file implicating Tracy. Each element compounds the tension, escalating fear, distrust, and uncertainty. And in the center of it all is a family grappling with grief, suspicion, and the public scrutiny that comes with being prominent in the world's eye. It is also worth noting the psychological dynamics at play. Families, particularly high-profile ones, often harbor tensions that are invisible from the outside. Rivalries, resentments, unspoken grievances, and long-held secrets can fester quietly, only to explode under pressure. In this scenario, the combination of violent loss and exposed secrets created a perfect storm. It is easy to imagine the fear, anger, confusion, and despair that would accompany such events. And in the middle of that storm, individuals must make choices that may define their lives forever. For Tracy, that choice allegedly came quickly. The moment she learned that the blackmail file was no longer secure, she reportedly decided to leave. Scotland, chosen for its distance, for its relative obscurity, became the refuge. But even as she made her escape, questions lingered in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Who leaked the file? Why did it surface now? And what, if any, role did the rest of the family play in the unfolding drama? These questions are as critical to understanding the story as the violent events themselves. This chapter of the story, this night when everything broke, is as much about action as it is about emotion. It is about the collision of tragedy, fear, and secrecy, and about the decisions that can alter lives irreversibly. It is about grief so intense it is almost tangible, so heavy it bends the air in a room. And it is about the realization that, in a world where wealth and influence often create the illusion of control, the most personal, intimate aspects of life remain astonishingly fragile. By the end of that night, the family was shattered, the authorities were in motion, and Tracy Reiner's alleged flight to Scotland had begun. The scene was set for a story that would unfold over weeks, months, and potentially years, each new revelation adding layers of intrigue, tension, and speculation. And while investigators and the public alike would work to understand the sequence of events, one truth remained stark and undeniable. That night, everything changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. But the night was only the beginning. Because the discovery of the vault and the blackmail file hinted at layers of secrets, power, and fear that had been carefully preserved for years. Layers that, when exposed, would ripple through the family, the investigation, and the public eye in ways no one could have predicted. And while the Reiners were coping with unimaginable loss, Tracy Reiner's alleged decisions were about to add a new dimension to the narrative, a dimension that would continue to unfold in unexpected and shocking ways. What came next would alter the course of the investigation, redefine the family's internal dynamics, and set the stage for the dramatic revelations that were still waiting to be uncovered. And no one, not investigators, not family, not the public, could have predicted just how far the consequences of one night would reach, or the way that fear and secrecy could drive a person to cross continents in search of safety. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Some rooms are meant to remain untouched. And some secrets, buried in the deepest corners of power and privilege, are never meant to see the light of day. But in the Reiner estate, one such door was opened, and what lay beyond it would ripple through the family, the investigation, and the public consciousness in ways no one could have anticipated. The vault had always existed quietly, a silent guardian of wealth, memories, and discretion. Hidden behind layers of security, it was the kind of place that inspires both curiosity and reverence. For years, it had been accessed only by those who were trusted implicitly, people who understood the stakes of what lay inside. For outsiders, it was almost mythical, a private universe where financial records, rare collectibles, and sensitive documents coexisted in silent order. And then, one night, investigators allegedly stepped into that universe, changing its purpose forever. The moment the vault was discovered, the tension in the estate reportedly shifted. Suddenly, what had been a horrific crime scene became a labyrinth of intrigue. Law enforcement officers, trained to observe, analyze, and document, approached it with caution. The air inside the room was reportedly charged with expectation and anxiety, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Every lock, every security mechanism, and every item on the shelves became a potential key to understanding the violent events that had just occurred. And then, there it was, a file, meticulously labeled, seemingly innocuous yet immediately compelling. Tracy, 2015 yacht incident. 3 words, decades apart, yet pregnant with implication. The folder had been hidden for nearly a decade, tucked into the vault alongside other documents of wealth and importance. Its presence suggested careful preservation. Someone had wanted it to survive the years. Someone had intended it to be used, but not necessarily now, not in the context of a murder investigation. The contents of the file, according to reports, were a mix of photographs, financial records, and threats, evidence that could alter public perception and personal reputation in equal measure. The photos, some allegedly candid, some more compromising, were enough to create fear, embarrassment, or even leverage over the person implicated. The financial documents hinted at payments, transfers, and other transactions that could suggest a relationship or obligation previously unseen. And the threats? They painted a picture of tension, intimidation, and power dynamics at play behind closed doors. But the most compelling aspect of this discovery was not merely its contents. It was the timing. The Reiner family was already grappling with tragedy. 2 lives had been taken violently, and a son had allegedly been arrested. Amid that chaos, a name from a file that had been tucked away for years suddenly surfaced. And while investigators documented, analyzed, and cataloged the evidence, the implied urgency was unmistakable. The secrets in this vault could not remain contained forever. Consider the psychology of this moment. A vault is designed to provide security. It is meant to protect. And yet, paradoxically, it also contains power. Power over individuals, over narratives, over reputation itself. The discovery of this particular file transformed the vault from a silent guardian into a catalyst. It was no longer just a repository of wealth and memorabilia. It had become a potential weapon, a source of fear, and a reason for someone to flee. Reports suggest that upon learning of the file's exposure, Tracy Reiner was faced with a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. Imagine, for a moment, the realization of knowing that personal, private information, carefully hidden for nearly a decade, is now in the hands of investigators, potentially visible to prosecutors, and possibly destined for public disclosure. The emotional weight of that moment is almost impossible to overstate. Panic, fear, and instinct likely collided in ways that felt overwhelming. The alleged decision to leave the country was not spontaneous. It was reportedly calculated, precise, and urgent. Scotland was chosen, experts suggest, not for convenience, but for strategic distance. It offered an environment removed from immediate scrutiny, a place where time and geography could create a buffer between exposure and consequence. Yet even as the plane took off, questions lingered in the air. Who had leaked the file? Could it have been someone within the estate? And how much of the information had already been viewed, shared, or recorded? Meanwhile, investigators continued to examine the vault with meticulous care. They reportedly noted the organization, the careful preservation of documents, and the fact that certain files had been deliberately segregated. Every item seemed purposeful, every placement intentional. And within this meticulous order, the file concerning Tracy stood out, not just for its potential content, but for what it suggested about relationships, trust, and influence within the family. The vault, in essence, told a story of its own. It spoke of a family that valued discretion, that recognized the power of information, and that understood the potential consequences of exposure. And yet, even in its careful order, it could not prevent the unforeseen. The intersection of tragedy, fear, and human decision-making that would soon transform a private space into the epicenter of a public narrative. For investigators, the challenge was enormous. How do you interpret evidence that exists in isolation yet has profound implications for individuals, relationships, and ongoing investigations? How do you balance the need for legal precision with the emotional weight of the scene? And how do you ensure that the facts uncovered in the vault are understood in context, rather than being distorted by the inevitable speculation of media and public opinion? These were the questions that shaped the hours and days following the discovery. But perhaps the most striking element of the vault's discovery was the human reaction it triggered. The file's contents, while confidential at the moment, had a psychological impact that went beyond mere curiosity. It created fear, uncertainty, and urgency. For Tracy, it allegedly catalyzed a flight response, a decision to escape, to find a sanctuary where exposure could be delayed or avoided. For investigators, it introduced a new layer of complexity to an already intricate case. And for the public, it would eventually feed a narrative filled with intrigue, suspense, and unanswered questions. Consider the juxtaposition. A vault, designed to protect and preserve, becomes the trigger for panic and upheaval. A folder, labeled with a single name and an incident from years past, becomes the pivot upon which lives, reputations, and legal processes might turn. The symbolism is hard to ignore. Secrets preserved in steel, locked away for safety, yet capable of unleashing chaos once the seal is broken. At the same time, the presence of the file raises profound questions about the nature of secrecy and power within families. Why had the file been preserved for so long? What did it represent? Was it leverage, insurance, or merely documentation? And how does its exposure, in the midst of an already catastrophic event, redefine the relationships, trust, and dynamics within the Reiner family? Each of these questions adds layers of tension, uncertainty, and intrigue, pulling the audience deeper into a narrative that refuses to settle into simplicity. And while investigators and family members were processing the implications of the vault, another thread of the story was quietly unfolding. Tracy Reiner's alleged decision to flee was not just a reaction to the file. It was a response to the convergence of fear, exposure, and the realization that certain secrets could no longer be contained. Her flight represented a human instinct at its rawest, survival. Yet survival, in a situation as high-stakes and public as this, comes with its own consequences. Geography may separate you from immediate danger, but the emotional, legal, and social ramifications remain inescapable. The discovery of the vault, then, is more than a plot point. It is a window into human psychology under pressure. It is a lens through which we can examine the interplay of secrecy, power, and fear. And it is a prelude to a series of decisions and actions that would continue to reverberate through the Reiner family, the investigation, and the media coverage surrounding one of the most dramatic alleged events in recent celebrity history. By the end of that night, the vault had fulfilled a paradoxical role. It had simultaneously preserved secrecy and triggered exposure. It had been a silent guardian, and yet, once opened, it became a catalyst for panic, flight, and speculation. For investigators, it was evidence. For family members, it was a revelation. And for the public, it would become a tantalizing glimpse into the complex, sometimes dark world of private lives intersecting with extraordinary tragedy. But what came next would reveal that the vault was only the beginning, and that the secrets it contained were far more powerful than anyone had anticipated. Every scandal has a starting point. Sometimes it begins quietly, in whispers. Other times, it explodes in full view of the world. For Tracy Reiner, the event that allegedly sparked years of secrecy and fear was tied to what investigators reportedly referred to as the 2015 yacht incident. Even the phrase alone carries weight. Luxury, isolation, exclusivity. And yet, behind the glamorous facade lay the potential for chaos, embarrassment, and leverage that could haunt someone for years. Picture it. A sleek yacht gliding across calm waters, the sun glinting off polished metal rails, champagne glasses clinking. On the surface, it is a scene of celebration, privilege, and opulence. But beneath that sparkling veneer, tensions can simmer. Power dynamics, unspoken rivalries, and hidden intentions often accompany those who live their lives in the spotlight. What appeared to be a carefree gathering reportedly became an event with consequences that would echo far beyond the waves. According to reports, the yacht incident involved a series of interactions, documents, and images that someone had deemed important enough to preserve in a vault nearly a decade later. While the details of the photos and financial records remain confidential, the very fact that they were preserved indicates their significance. They were not casual mementos of a social gathering. They were records, evidence, and, ultimately, leverage. And when such material falls into the wrong hands, or even becomes known to the wrong people, fear becomes the natural response. Consider the psychology here. People who live in high-profile, high-stakes environments develop acute awareness of perception. Every action, every photograph, every casual comment can be interpreted, misinterpreted, or weaponized. For someone like Tracy Reiner, alleged involvement in an incident that had been meticulously documented would naturally create anxiety once she learned of the file's exposure. Suddenly, a private moment, one that had remained hidden for years, transformed into a potential public scandal. What exactly happened on the yacht may never be fully known. The public record is intentionally vague, maintaining both intrigue and discretion. But the implications are profound. The files allegedly contain photos that suggest relationships or actions not meant for public eyes. The financial documents hint at transactions or arrangements that could be interpreted as favors, obligations, or even coercion. And the threats documented within the folder suggest that someone, possibly Rob Reiner, intended to maintain control over these secrets. Imagine the tension aboard that yacht. Even a single misstep could have lasting consequences, but according to reports, the incident was not immediately exposed. It remained hidden, locked away in private records, until the discovery of the vault years later. And that delayed exposure is precisely what elevated the fear and urgency when the file allegedly surfaced. Time, in this case, did not heal or erase. It merely increased the stakes. The yacht itself becomes symbolic. On the surface, it represents luxury, freedom, and escape. Yet, in this narrative, it also represents entrapment, vulnerability, and exposure. Just as the waters beneath the yacht can conceal hidden depths and treacherous currents, the incident aboard concealed tensions, secrets, and leverage that would only emerge when the right, or wrong, people gained access to them. And therein lies the human element, the intersection of privilege and peril. Being in a position of wealth and influence does not insulate someone from fear, shame, or threat. In fact, it often amplifies it. Those with visibility and access have more to lose, and when secrets are threatened, the potential fallout can feel catastrophic. This is reportedly what Tracy faced. A file once safely hidden, now accessible, now threatening to disrupt everything. The flight to Scotland, in this context, becomes not just an act of escape, but an instinctual effort to regain control over a situation spiraling beyond comprehension. But fear is rarely a rational motivator. It twists perceptions, magnifies danger, and accelerates decision-making. Imagine the moment Tracy allegedly learned that the yacht file was no longer secure. The shock, the realization, the immediate calculation of next steps, it all aligns with human behavior under extreme stress. When confronted with potential exposure of deeply personal material, the instinct to flee, to protect, to regain agency, can override logic, planning, and even loyalty. Meanwhile, investigators reviewing the vault could see the significance of the yacht incident, even if the full context remained obscured. Photos, financial documents, and recorded threats provided a mosaic of events that, pieced together, told a story of power, secrecy, and potential coercion. Each element alone might have seemed benign. Together, they revealed a pattern of deliberate preservation, of careful management, of leverage meant to be exercised only when strategically advantageous. And yet, the paradox is striking. The very act of preserving these documents, intended to control risk, also created risk. By maintaining a record, someone had ensured that the information would endure, that it could resurface, and that its impact could be amplified. It was this paradox that reportedly forced Tracy's hand. The longer the documents existed, the greater the potential for exposure. And once exposure seemed imminent, escape became the only option that promised temporary reprieve. Think about the dynamics at play. A private incident from years prior suddenly becomes central to a high-profile investigation. The stakes are no longer hypothetical. They are immediate, tangible, and severe. For the Reiner family, already reeling from tragedy, the incident represents not only past mistakes but present crises. Every connection, every relationship, and every prior decision is now subject to scrutiny, reinterpretation, and public speculation. Moreover, the yacht incident illustrates the fragility of trust. A gathering meant for leisure and camaraderie can transform into a repository of leverage. Relationships that seemed secure may not have been so. Friends, family members, and associates can become vectors of exposure. And for someone in Tracy's position, realizing that the past is suddenly a present threat can trigger actions that alter the trajectory of one's life in irrevocable ways. There is also an element of timing and coincidence that cannot be ignored. The incident occurred years earlier, safely tucked away. The tragic deaths of Rob and Michelle brought investigators into the estate. The discovery of the vault, containing the meticulously preserved file, aligned with the family crisis in a way that seems almost scripted for maximum impact. And yet, for those living through it, the experience was anything but theatrical. It was immediate, overwhelming, and terrifying. As authorities reportedly reviewed the yacht file, the potential leverage became clear. The documents suggested not only a past incident, but also ongoing implications. They were a reminder that secrets, once documented, carry a weight that endures. For Tracy, the stakes were personal. Flight to Scotland was a defensive measure, a way to distance herself from exposure, and perhaps to buy time while the consequences played out. But even distance cannot erase the complexities introduced by such revelations. The yacht incident file, once leaked, introduced new questions for investigators, the family, and the public. Who else knew about the incident? Were there other preserved documents? And most importantly, what would be the response from those whose secrets were threatened by exposure? Every question opened a door to another, creating layers of suspense, intrigue, and potential conflict. And so, the yacht incident stands as both a literal and symbolic turning point. It represents a past that refused to stay buried, a catalyst for fear, and the starting point for a flight that would take Tracy across continents. It is a reminder that in lives intertwined with privilege, fame, and influence, small events can have enormous consequences, especially when documentation transforms a private moment into a potential weapon. The human factor is undeniable. Fear, shame, and the instinct to survive drove decisions that night and in the days that followed. And while investigators, family members, and the public attempt to piece together motives and timelines, the psychological truth remains. Exposure of secrets can compel extraordinary action. Flight, secrecy, and protective measures often coexist in complex, unpredictable ways. By the end of the analysis, one truth emerges. The 2015 yacht incident was never just a moment frozen in time. It was a story preserved, a leverage point, and ultimately a trigger. Its revelation in the vault prompted decisions that would reverberate far beyond the deck of a yacht, far beyond the confines of a private vault, and far beyond the Reiner estate itself. And while the world may never know every detail, the consequences were already unfolding. Tracy Reiner's alleged flight, the investigation's growing complexity, and the family's escalating tension all trace their origins back to that night, that incident, and the meticulously preserved evidence that had lain dormant for nearly a decade. But what came next would push the story even further into uncharted territory, and the secrets of the yacht were only the beginning. Some images are harmless. They capture birthdays, anniversaries, sunsets, or ordinary moments that fade into memory. Others, however, have a weight that is almost tangible. They are capable of shaping perception, influencing decisions, and altering lives. According to reports, the vault at the Reiner estate contained photographs that belonged to the latter category, photos that were never meant to surface, yet had the power to upend reputations, relationships, and perhaps even lives. Imagine opening a folder, expecting to see mundane records, and instead encountering a visual narrative so potent that it evokes immediate fear and urgency. The alleged Tracy 2015 yacht incident file reportedly contained images that suggested personal interactions, confidential meetings, and moments of vulnerability. These were not snapshots meant for social media or casual memory keeping. They were meticulously preserved, seemingly intended to remain hidden, yet potent enough that their exposure could trigger panic. The psychology of such images is profound. Humans react instinctively to visual information. Unlike written records, which require interpretation, photographs confront us with what seems undeniable, a frozen moment in time. They cannot lie, but they can be misleading, framed out of context, or weaponized. And according to reports, this is precisely what made the Reiner vault photos so dangerous. They were records that could be interpreted in multiple ways, yet each interpretation carried consequences. For Tracy, allegedly implicated by the file, the discovery of these images would have been overwhelming. Consider the emotional impact: years of privacy, carefully curated public behavior, and private discretion suddenly threatened by documentation. Panic, fear, and the desire to regain control over one's narrative are almost instinctual responses in such circumstances. The human brain, when faced with potential exposure of personal vulnerability, often triggers flight, or in extreme cases, drastic action. And that is reportedly what happened. The alleged decision to leave the country, to escape immediate exposure, aligns with how individuals respond when confronted with evidence they cannot control. Distance becomes a temporary shield, time a buffer, and geography a way to delay consequences while recalibrating strategy. But even the act of fleeing carries its own psychological and social ramifications. One cannot simply remove oneself from a situation without altering relationships, trust, and perception. But the power of these photographs extends beyond the individual. For investigators, the images were evidence. For the family, they were potential sources of tension and speculation. And for the public, once leaked or reported, they would feed a narrative that is impossible to ignore. The photographs serve as both historical record and emotional catalyst, a reminder of how one private moment, captured and preserved, can become central to a public drama years later. The content of the images, while intentionally vague in public reports, is crucial to understanding their impact. Allegedly, they depicted scenarios that were intimate, revealing, or indicative of transactions, relationships, or behaviors that had never been disclosed. The mere suggestion of impropriety, when paired with tangible visual evidence, can magnify fear exponentially. It is not the certainty of wrongdoing that drives panic. It is the possibility of exposure, misinterpretation, and the social, financial, or legal consequences that might follow. Investigators reportedly approached these photos with caution. Unlike financial records, which can be quantified, or documents, which can be cataloged, images carry emotional weight. Each photograph is a puzzle piece, yet without context, it can mislead. Analysts must consider angles, timing, and surrounding circumstances. For example, a candid shot of two individuals on the yacht could suggest closeness, collusion, or something more innocuous entirely. Interpretation is key, and in high-stakes situations, interpretation can become both evidence and weapon. There is also a temporal element to consider. The photographs were taken years before the vault's discovery. They were relics of a past that seemed safely archived, forgotten by the world, and irrelevant to current events. Yet their endurance is what made them dangerous. Preservation across time means that mistakes, indiscretions, and moments of vulnerability do not fade. They accumulate potential energy. And when unleashed suddenly, that energy can disrupt not only personal lives, but entire family dynamics. Think about the tension of this moment from Tracy's perspective. The images, once hidden, are suddenly accessible. Every interaction, every pose, every gesture captured years ago now carries the potential for immediate scrutiny. Panic is understandable. And while flight might seem like a drastic measure, in the face of imminent exposure, it becomes a rational, if desperate, choice. Scotland, in this narrative, becomes not just a destination but a psychological refuge, a place where one can step away from the immediate threat of visibility and control the narrative at least temporarily. Yet, The vault's photographs do more than explain an individual's reaction. They also reveal a network of relationships and influence. The content hints at connections, agreements, or tensions that were previously invisible. Financial transactions, casual interactions, and intimate moments all become pieces of a puzzle, revealing power dynamics, loyalties, and potential leverage points. Each photo may hold its own significance, but collectively, they outline a web of influence that extends far beyond the yacht, the vault, or the immediate family. There is also the question of intent. Why were these images preserved? Were they meant as documentation, leverage, protection, or control? Perhaps all of the above. Someone clearly understood the potential consequences of exposure and took steps to ensure the photographs endured. That foresight, intentional or otherwise, is what transformed a private moment into a catalyst for fear nearly a decade later. Preservation, after all, can be both protective and threatening, depending on who gains access and when. The vault and its photographs also illustrate the fragility of trust. People may act with discretion, assuming that secrecy is absolute. Yet, as the Reiner case reportedly demonstrates, preservation creates risk. Documents can be discovered, images can be analyzed, and secrets once thought safe can suddenly wield influence over choices, behavior, and fate. The photographs in the vault, as powerful as any financial record or written threat, became the trigger for a series of events that no one could have predicted. It's important to consider the role of emotion in this story. Fear, shame, and vulnerability intersect in ways that drive human behavior unpredictably. Exposure of private material triggers instinctive responses. Panic overrides deliberation. Decisions are accelerated. For Tracy, the photos reportedly acted as a catalyst, transforming anxiety into action, doubt into escape, and uncertainty into a flight that would take her across continents. And yet, even as we focus on individual psychology, the larger picture cannot be ignored. The photographs, by surfacing in the vault during the investigation, introduced new complications for authorities. They added layers of evidence, potential motives, and interpretive challenges. Each image was a piece of the narrative, but the narrative itself was far from complete. Context, intent, and timing would all become central to understanding the sequence of events, the reactions of family members, and the choices made in response to the revelation of these images. Consider, too, the narrative tension for the audience. These photographs are a window into a hidden world. A world where privilege, secrecy, and personal vulnerability intersect. They raise questions. How much do we know about the private lives of those around us? How much can we control the narrative of our own lives when documentation exists beyond our reach? And when those who preserve secrets wield power through them, who ultimately holds control? By the end of this chapter, one thing is clear. The photographs were not just images. They were instruments of influence, sources of anxiety, and triggers for action. They connected past behavior with present consequences, revealing the fragility of privacy, the impact of preserved secrets, and the psychological weight of exposure. For Tracy Reiner, the discovery of these photos in the vault set in motion a flight that would alter the course of the investigation, complicate family dynamics, and introduce a level of public intrigue few could ignore. And just when it seemed that the vault's secrets had revealed everything, another layer of evidence emerged, financial records tied to the photographs. This would add an entirely new dimension to the story, one that linked image to action, vulnerability to leverage, and fear to decision-making. But what came next would deepen the mystery and demonstrate that photographs alone, no matter how revealing, were only part of a much larger puzzle. In many of the most shocking scandals, money is more than just currency. It is influence, leverage, and a record of secrets. The old adage holds true: follow the money, and you'll find the story hidden beneath layers of appearance and discretion. In the Reiner estate, the vault allegedly contained financial records that tied directly to the infamous 2015 yacht incident. These documents were not mere spreadsheets. They were pieces of a puzzle that revealed relationships, obligations, and pressures that had been carefully maintained for years, only to resurface in the midst of tragedy. Picture a ledger, neat columns of numbers meticulously recorded, tracking transfers, accounts, and expenditures. On its face, it might appear dry, bureaucratic, and innocuous. But in the wrong, or right, hands, it becomes a roadmap of influence. Every transaction tells a story. Who paid whom, when, and for what? Why was a transfer made under a particular name? And how might it relate to personal leverage or private threats? In the case of the Reiner Vault, these financial documents reportedly connected directly to Tracy Reiner, raising stakes far beyond ordinary curiosity. The first question any investigator would ask is deceptively simple. What was the purpose of these transfers? Allegedly, some of the payments linked back to the yacht incident. Were they reimbursement for expenses, compensation for silence, or payments designed to manipulate behavior? Each interpretation carries weight. The distinction between casual financial activity and deliberate influence can be razor-thin, and yet the implications are massive. For someone allegedly implicated by the file, understanding the intent behind these transactions could mean the difference between feeling secure and feeling exposed. Think about the psychological effect of discovering such documents. For Tracy, realizing that not only photographs but also financial evidence exists and has potentially been preserved for years creates layers of anxiety. A photo can embarrass, a document can incriminate. Together, they create a picture of exposure so comprehensive it can feel impossible to escape. The vault had become a nexus of fear, documenting interactions and transactions that were once private, but which now might have been accessible to investigators, prosecutors, and potentially even the public. Financial records are also deceptively revealing because they carry a timestamp. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every ledger entry is dated. These dates can link seemingly unrelated events to a pattern of behavior. In the Reiner case, the timing of transactions allegedly associated with the yacht incident suggested deliberate planning, careful preservation, and, most importantly, leverage. Those who understand the pattern could use it to predict behavior, exert pressure, or manipulate outcomes. In short, money becomes a language of influence, and the vault its grammar. Now imagine investigators sifting through these records. Every detail matters. Each entry is cross-referenced with photographs, communications, and other documents. The goal is to establish a timeline, to understand the relationships between people, and to identify potential motives for actions. In this case, the financial records reportedly painted a picture of complex interpersonal dynamics that may have been fraught with fear, leverage, and secrecy. And while investigators analyzed the numbers, those implicated were reacting instinctively. Tracy's alleged flight to Scotland, for instance, can be viewed in this light. When financial records, photographs, and personal threats converge, the pressure can become unbearable. Distance becomes a strategy, a temporary buffer against scrutiny. Yet the action itself carries consequences. It signals awareness, urgency, and potential culpability, even if the primary motivation is simply survival or self-preservation. For investigators and the public, such actions can appear incriminating, even if the reality is more nuanced. The financial records also reveal something else: intention. Money is rarely neutral. Transfers, payments, and ledgers exist for a reason. In the context of the vault, these records suggest that someone, allegedly Rob Reiner, according to reports, maintained these files not as casual accounting, but as a means of preserving leverage. They were not accidental. They were deliberate, strategic, and long-lasting. Preservation across years speaks to foresight, control, and an understanding of the enduring power of secrets when tied to finances. The implications for the Reiner family are profound. Financial documents like these, coupled with photographs and threats, do more than tell a story. They influence behavior. They can provoke fear, motivate flight, and create rifts within families. The presence of the documents in the vault suggests that someone understood the consequences of exposure and intentionally maintained the tools for leverage, even if they never anticipated the violent chain of events that would later unfold. Consider, too, the media and public narrative. Money attracts attention. When financial documents emerge in a high-profile case, speculation escalates. People ask, who is implicated? What obligations exist? And what does this say about family dynamics, loyalty, and potential motives? Each question magnifies suspense, fuels curiosity, and keeps audiences engaged. The financial records in the Reiner vault were, in effect, a story within a story, complex, layered, and far from complete. There is also the symbolic aspect of following the money. In investigations involving wealth and privilege, financial records often serve as the most objective evidence of relationships, influence, and potential wrongdoing. Unlike photographs or anecdotal reports, numbers cannot lie, yet they can be interpreted. And interpretation, particularly when combined with human fear and decision-making, can create extraordinary consequences. In this case, the records reportedly contributed directly to Tracy's perception of threat and her alleged decision to flee. Timing is again critical. The documents were discovered after a violent tragedy. The deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner, allegedly at the hands of their son Nick, had already created shockwaves. The discovery of financial records linked to the yacht incident added a new dimension. It connected the past to the present, suggesting that actions taken years ago were now influencing decisions in real time. In a way, money became the invisible hand guiding the unfolding drama, silent, precise, and devastatingly effective. Investigators reportedly mapped each transaction carefully. Some payments appeared routine, others suggested obligation or intent. The pattern was striking. Where money flowed, influence followed. Where influence existed, fear could arise. And in the Reiner narrative, fear became a driver of behavior, shaping decisions that would ripple across families, continents, and investigative timelines. For the Reiner family, the implications could not have been more personal. Financial records, particularly when combined with photographs and threats, raise questions about loyalty, judgment, and trust. Who was aware of these transactions? Who stood to benefit or lose? And most importantly, how might the existence of these records have influenced behavior leading up to the tragic events in the estate? Each question adds layers to a story already fraught with tension and uncertainty. Ultimately, the financial documents illustrate a universal truth about human behavior. The intersection of money, power, and secrecy is combustible. It creates circumstances in which fear can drive extreme decisions. It magnifies stakes. It converts private interactions into leverage. And in the Reiner case, according to reports, it catalyzed an alleged flight across continents, a desperate effort to regain control over a situation that had suddenly become unmanageable. Yet even as the money revealed connections, pressures, and potential motives, it was clear that the vault contained even more than anyone could immediately process. The combination of photographs, threats, and financial records hinted at deeper patterns. Layers of information that, once exposed, could completely reshape public understanding of the family's dynamics, motives, and fears. The vault, it seemed, was only the beginning. By the end of the investigation into these documents, one undeniable truth emerged. Following the money was not merely about numbers. It was about influence, leverage, fear, and the decisions driven by both. It was about understanding human behavior under pressure and the cascading consequences that follow exposure of secrets carefully preserved over years. For Tracy Reiner, the money was more than numbers. It was a signal, a warning, and an impetus for immediate action. But what came next would tie the photographs and the financial records together in ways that no one anticipated, and force the story into its next, even more shocking phase. In every story of secrets, there is often a moment where information becomes more than knowledge, it becomes a weapon. In the case of the Reiner family, the vault allegedly contained more than photographs and financial records. It reportedly contained threats, written, recorded, or otherwise documented warnings directed at individuals whose actions, behaviors, or decisions could be influenced, coerced, or controlled. These threats were more than cautionary notes. They were instruments of power, fear, and manipulation, capable of triggering profound consequences for anyone entangled in their reach. Consider the nature of a threat. Unlike an accidental exposure, it is deliberate, intentional, and precise. A threat is designed to elicit a response, to provoke fear, compliance, or avoidance. In the vault, according to reports, the threats allegedly tied directly to the 2015 yacht incident and the financial records associated with it. This triangulation of evidence, images, money, and threats created a layered framework of pressure. For those implicated, the psychological weight was enormous. Every document became a reminder of potential vulnerability, every number a marker of influence, every photograph a reminder that private moments were no longer truly private. Psychologically, the presence of threats transforms fear into action. Panic, urgency, and the instinct to survive converge, compelling individuals to make decisions that might have seemed unimaginable under normal circumstances. For Tracy Reiner, the alleged threats were reportedly the final trigger in a sequence that began years earlier. Photos suggested vulnerability. Financial documents indicated leverage. And the threats, direct, unmistakable, and preserved, created a scenario in which flight became a rational, if extreme, choice. Threats operate on multiple levels. They are personal, often targeting specific behaviors, decisions, or relationships. They are legal, hinting at consequences, exposure, or scrutiny. And they are social, implying judgment, shame, or public scrutiny. In the context of the Reiner vault, these layers reportedly combined to create a situation in which secrecy, reputation, and perceived control were all under immediate threat. For someone with visibility, status, and connections, the impact is magnified exponentially. Imagine receiving a written warning years after the event it references, coupled with financial evidence and compromising photos. The timing alone would be unnerving. But add to that the context of a violent family tragedy, parents allegedly murdered, a sibling arrested, and investigators combing through every aspect of the estate, and the situation becomes almost unbearable. Fear transforms into urgency. Decisions are accelerated. Escape, flight, or concealment may become the only perceived means of preserving safety and autonomy. The threats reportedly contained in the vault were not subtle. They carried specificity, references to events, behaviors, or potential exposure. The intent, analysts suggest, was not merely to intimidate in the abstract, but to assert leverage over a specific individual. When combined with corroborating evidence like photographs and financial transactions, the psychological pressure is magnified. Suddenly, a private past has public potential. A misstep or delayed reaction could result in exposure, embarrassment, or legal entanglement. Investigators reviewing the vault had to consider these threats carefully. Threats are, by nature, subjective. They reflect the perception of risk, power, and consequence. Determining the validity, intent, or potential impact requires both forensic and psychological analysis. In the Reiner case, the threats reportedly contextualized the other evidence. They tied the photographs and financial records to a tangible sense of urgency and pressure. They explained why an individual might feel compelled to act immediately, even dramatically.